Hello, friends, and welcome to episode number 105 of Nostalgia Talk. I'm James, and before I introduce the guest, there's a couple of things I want to say first. So, in my last show, I acknowledged the LA wildfires that have impacted a lot of people within the city, and including some of my previous guests who had to evacuate. And they're fine. I don't think any of them lost their homes, but right now the fires are 100% contained. And so I just want to mention a little thank you to the Los Angeles Fire Department and everybody else who's put their lives on the line. Firefighters really are selfless people. They are going out there in the middle of these dangerous times and really putting others before themselves by doing what it is that they do. So a big thank you to the LA Fire Department for all their hard work over the month of January. Another thing I want to bring up on a very, very positive side is our previous guest number 50, Fran Brill, is set to be honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award. So a big congratulations to Fran on that. And now on with the show. Joining me for this episode is Luis Santiro.
Hi, James. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to our chat. It's
Well,
great.
it's great to have you here. A
I didn't
lot
know
of
about Fran getting that award. That's wonderful.
I'll pass along a congratulations to from you to her.
Yeah, please do. I know she's in Savannah, but I haven't seen her again since she retired.
Mm. Yeah,
Uh,
she came on when I did episode number 50, which was in 2022. And in November, I did episode number 100.
oh my God, you're really moving them along, huh?
Oh, yeah. I've
Yeah.
been doing this since the pandemic. It just kind of started as a pandemic project. And I've just kind of kept on going, even on like really, really busy times. I've just kind of kept on going and going and going. And it'll be 5 years in October.
That's wonderful. Congratulations. A lot of good things started during COVID. Came out of that unfortunate situation. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Now, for anybody who doesn't know, Luis is a writer who is most well known for his contributions to Sesame Street, writing episode scripts as well as home videos, specials, song lyrics, a lot of that stuff in Spanish.
Mhm.
Of course, we've learned a lot of Spanish from Sesame Street over the last 55 plus years, basically, and a lot of that we've basically learned from Luis because he's the one who wrote a lot of it. And in addition to Sesame Street, he's worked on Big Bag for Children's Television Workshop, The Furchester Hotel, which is one of the British spin-offs for Sesame Street. He created the sitcom Que Pasa USA, the first bilingual sitcom ever, and also wrote for Lomax the Hound of Music on PBS.
Well, you really did some research here. I guess a
Norman
lot of it is
Stiles
now.
introduced me to Lomax the Hound of Music. I really like that show.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was developed by by one of our head by Norman Stiles, one of our head writers, and Chris Surf, who was
That's right.
also a writer for Sesame Street and a music composer. Yeah, great.
Both very good friends of mine and of this show.
Yeah, it seems like you've had a lot of people already in your show.
Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful.
So let's start by going back a bit. How did you become interested in writing?
It was funny. I always liked to write in school, but I never thought it was something that I would pursue or that I could pursue. And we had come from Cuba, and my father thought, you do something, need something to earn a living. He didn't think that one could earn a living with writing, that I would waste not waste my time. He never discouraged me, but I didn't feel like really secure about doing that. So I went to the Newhouse School in Syracuse, which is journalism. I was under TV and film, but mostly I was doing production, like learning how to make film, which is totally useless now because we're still splicing and doing all that kind of stuff. And I worked at a local TV station doing camera work and assistant cinematographer. I did a lot of that. And then it was really I did a lot of, in my early life, a lot of different jobs trying to get my career going, some that had no relation to the business. I was a parole officer for a year and a half,
Oh,
which is
wow.
interesting sideline. And then at one point, I was on a film crew, and what they wanted was a writer to help write these little documentaries. So we're traveling around the country. And then from there, I was referred to a show. It was a PBS show that was under a government grant in Austin, Texas. It was called Carrascolendas, and it was like half-hour mini musicals, and they were sort of like affective, emotional stuff. I'm okay dealing with the biculturalism and all that, and what they wanted was a writer, so I started writing, and then from there I went to Que Pasa USA, and I ended up becoming the head writer with that. So in my life just took an unexpected sidetrack, which I was avoiding writing, and yet that's where it took me. And with Sesame Street, there was a guy, Ozzy Alfonso, he had been a line producer with Sesame Street, and he had taken a leave of absence the prior year to work in the show that I worked with in Austin, and I met him there. And then he saw what I did with Que Pasa, and I wanted to move to New York. I had just moved to New York. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I took the plunge. And like 3 days after I got here, I got a call from Ozzy. Luis, they're looking for writers for Sesame Street, and I'd like for you to audition. And I auditioned, and I know I think of my audition pieces. I knew the show a little bit, but not well. The audition pieces were pretty awful.
Do you
And
remember what they were, or if they even
oh,
aired at
one
all?
was like one of them. I had a rat in Oscar's can, and they said we don't do rats on Sesame Street. So that was one. I forget what the rat was doing, but there was something about that. And the other one was about heavy light, and it was heavy light meaning weight, and I thought it was like light, like bright light, so I confused it completely. Anyway, I had an interview and I got the job, and I do think, talking about DEI now, I think that may have given me an edge back then. The fact that I was Latin, they didn't have any minority writers, any Latin writers. Now, obviously, that didn't keep me on the show for 41 years if I had just been that. And I did some of this, I mean, the Spanish, I didn't do a lot of it actually, because whenever I had to write, I'm jumping ahead, I'm jumping all over the place. But when I ever did something Latin, it had to go through research doubly, and
Mhm.
I call it the research police. And I said sometimes at one point I talked to a producer, I said, I'm not going to do one more Spanish bit because every time I do something Spanish, I get put through the ringer. Oh, well, this is basically Mexican, but it's not, it's not this, it's not Caribbean, or this is Caribbean, it's not Mexican, or it's like that. So, or they'd say, oh, we're dealing with food and music, and that's stereotypic. And I said, well, how do you deal with children who are 3 to 5 with other than music? You want to get into the philosophy of culture? So a lot of times I would avoid it, because of that. But I did do a lot of Latin. So I loved it when I could use something cultural. I could. Anyway, that's I'm going all over the place.
But I am glad that you brought up Que Pasa USA because, as I said in the intro, that was the first bilingual sitcom. And even though that's a show that's kind of obscure, like I'm gonna confess, I didn't know what it was until I started researching for this. I'm a big sitcom watcher.
Uh-huh.
Like I'm a huge fan of like old school classic sitcoms. But with it being the first bilingual sitcom, like that's really, really significant in
It
TV,
really
I think.
was. It's way before your time. You weren't even your parents. Were probably like kids when we did that show. It was we wrote it the last season. I think was 1980. So that's a long time. But it's still amazingly. It still plays in places like Miami every day, daily on PBS. And the kids now who are growing up, or teenagers, watch it. Something that I'm amazed that they still watch it and connect to it. And because there's so many immigrants still coming from Venezuela, from Central America, from everywhere, and they're being introduced, they're seeing themselves, even though it's later, they're still, because there was a show that dealt with the assimilation into the country. It was 3 generations, and the grandparents didn't speak any English, and the grandkids didn't want to speak Spanish. So it was the conflicts in a 3 generation home. And that still applies because we still have all these immigrants coming in, obviously. But it ran on PBS, and we won a lot of regional Emmy awards, and it did very good. They're very well, but it did play nationally at that point. Now it hasn't been national for a long time. Univision and Telemundo used to play it in places like New York, New Jersey. So, but you wouldn't in Halifax. I don't know that it played in Halifax.
Maybe I'll see it on some TV guide for
Yeah,
PBS
it's on
someday.
on you. If you go on YouTube, Google, they have lots of it in there. You know, it's funny, and it was a requirement because it was came under a government grant of the Office of Health and Education. It had to be 50% English and 50% Spanish. So people say, "Oh, I learned Spanish watching Que Pasa." I say, "Really?" Because it was hard. But we had monolingual readers of every script, so that they had to be able to follow the script. You know, so we did. You know, we went back and forth the way a lot of bilingual families operate, but we did it so you could follow the theme of the show. And it was comedy, it was sitcom, and some of them were very, very funny. And we dealt with stuff that we got away with because there we had no real government a group overseeing everything we did. So we dealt with racism, we did with virginity, we dealt with drugs, we dealt with gay. We had a gay bar in one thing, and for being late 70s, I mean Norman Lear was doing some of that, but to do it at a local PBS level with a Latin group, that was pretty advanced back then. We were
That's
lucky. It was a lucky break that we
mhm.
had.
That's really nice that you got to cover that on a show like that. That's
Yeah.
amazing, and
And that
and on such a diverse show too.
Yeah, and we really, a lot of issues that, again, immigrant families are still going through. We dealt with them back then. And I'm very happy because it got me to Sesame Street. It led me to, that's how I found my way to Sesame Street.
Mm. So when you auditioned for Sesame Street, was that under Norman? Was that while Norman was the head writer?
No, Norman at that point had been in LA working in sitcoms over there. And so it wasn't, and they actually didn't, the first year that I wrote, we had a producer named Al Hislop. And we didn't really have a head writer that year. Then Norman came, I think, 2 years after I got there. He came back.
Mhm.
But that year, well, two things happened. They were about to do some remotes in Puerto Rico, where Maria was going to Puerto Rico
For her
to
21st birthday.
yes, that was the thing. So I think they did like 10 shows down there. So perhaps they felt, okay, we need a Latin writer for this. So they sent me with the producers down to Puerto Rico to scout and to find themes and all that. And then the Al Hislop put me in a room with two writers who had been working there for a long time, Judy Freudberg and Sarah Compton, both of whom have both died, none of them. And Sarah, unfortunately, she was a close friend of mine till the end. She died recently, and they were
Oh.
great. So he put me in a room with them, and I was telling him sort of
This
rough.
is news to me. I didn't know that Sarah had passed away.
Sarah
Wow.
just passed away in December. Yeah,
Oh.
and I was very moved by it because we were always she was living in Wyoming, but we were always in touch, and she would come every summer back to East Hampton, where she and her husband had lived for many years, and we'd always get together. So that was a hard thing.
All right.
But
Well, in memory of Sarah Compton.
yes, absolutely, a great one. She had a very unique sense of humor that I enjoyed, and always a great appreciation of life, the way she just enjoyed her life. So anyway, that's a sad loss. But they put me in a room with Judy and Sarah, and I would say, well, and Big Bird meets a rooster, and she's trying to communicate. He's trying to communicate with a rooster in Spanish, and then they go blah 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 blah, and they come up and they were writing all the dialogue, because at that point I didn't have the voices in my head. I felt terrible that first those 2 weeks that we wrote those episodes like in 2 weeks, but I felt I was coming up with ideas that they could develop, but I didn't have the dialogue. I mean, it was like a crash course in 2 weeks. But it took me a while to get the all the voices in Sesame Street, the real gap. I hadn't really written for children,
Mm.
at that point. I mean, Que Pasa was teenagers, and I was trying to write plays. I was trying to write, well, I had written for that children's show in Austin, so I did, but it was different. Sesame Street was very the Muppet voices were really ruling.
Mm.
And it was great. It was great, a great training ground. And then Norman came in, and Norman was really had that, skit comedy. It's got to have a button, and yeah, okay, it's a great idea, Luis, but how does it button? And you live in fear that we can either find the button or he sends me back to the drawing board.
That
So
totally sounds like Norman.
he was a tough taskmaster, you know,
Oh
and
yeah. He's very passionate. Like that's the thing I've all like when I first met him and I hear him talking about when it comes to coming up with where's the comedy for Sesame Street. And he and Lou Berger both are really, really good at that. And
yes,
like instantly when I met Norman, I was like, yeah, he seems really, really passionate about it. He seems to, for what they were trying to do back in those days, because the show has changed. And
oh yeah,
both Norman and Lou agree with me that the show has really, really changed over the last few years, especially um, that, Norman and Lou were so good at like, where's the comedy in the teaching in this?
absolutely. I mean, really comedy, and my comedy. I've always thought I'm not a comedy writer. My comedy comes out of situation. You know. So I had everything I've done, my plays, you know, Que Pasa, everything. Then I can find the comedy, but I am not like a gag writer, or you know, my funny lines have to come out of a funny situation. And a lot of times I struggle with that because, you know, both Lou and Norman, they just come up with all that comedy and all that stuff. So I was trying to see how I could incorporate into my approach to comedy. And sometimes I really hit it on the nail, sometimes I didn't, you know. But now I think about that all the time. And whenever I'm writing something and you think about, you know, developing it and where are you taking it, you know, and everything. And watching now that we just had the 50th anniversary of Saturday Night Live, and I watched it and I know they only have, I mean, what they do is amazing. They have a week to put a show together and really a pressure that we never had on Sesame Street. But a lot of times they do sketches that come up, oh my gosh, funny idea, and then they kind of peter out.
It's
And
like with
that
Sesame Street, they shoot it like so far in advance. Saturday Night Live is like, okay, 3, 2, 1, we're on.
and that's it. And they're doing it live too. So they've
Mm-hmm.
got to do that. But I said, you know, if Norman had his hands on that, he said, where's the button? Where's the button? And sometimes they don't have the time to do it, not only because it's just a time construction, but they're doing it live. In Sesame Street, you can, you know, and sometimes the Muppeteers themselves come up with something that just sharpens it. You know, so we had a long time. I never felt like I felt under the gun with meeting the head writer when I had an appointment, making sure that I had that, but not in terms of taping dates. By the time, you know, usually tape months after the script was written, you know. And but that was boy, that was with both Norman and both of them say, but they had different approaches too. Norman and as head writers, Norman and Lou, they were different. I felt more intimidated by Norman.
You're not the only writer from Sesame Street I've talked to who has said that.
Yeah, because with Lou and I, you know, and Norman would hear and say, "What are you saying, Luis?" But with Norman, he'd say, "Okay, I can't, you know, I don't know the button. I know where it is. Go back to a drawing board." With Lou, he was more patient. You know, sometimes we'd sit there and try to figure out where it's going. He'd say, "Okay, we're not there yet, but let's see." So I felt, you know, but yeah, Norman intimidated me. But now we see. Speaking of COVID, during COVID, he started I don't know, maybe he talked about it, a Zoom with a lot of the old Sesame Street
That's
writers,
right. Yeah. Norman
all long
actually
retired.
connected me with Lou because of it.
Yeah, so every Tuesday, like last night, they canceled. If there's not a quorum, if there's only like two or three who can make it, then they cancel. But pretty much it's gone on now for about 4 or 5 years, and it's nice because you reconnect with everybody. And Norman,
I love that you guys are still friends. Like, because I've talked to quite a fair bit of you guys. I've talked to Norman Lou. I've talked to Kathy Turo and Belinda Ward, and now
uh,
you.
yeah, great, great. You talk to Sonia. Sonia Manzano. She joins it quite a bit too.
Oh,
Sonia.
oh, that's
Sonia's
cool.
all over the place now. She has that show Alma's Way on PBS, and she co-head write, co-producer and writer, and she's got writing books and she's giving speeches around the country. And my God, Sonia is like everywhere. But
Hi,
Sonia's
Sonia, if you're listening.
yeah. So
So, talking about writing for Sesame Street and with like the Muppets, did you have a favorite Muppet to write for?
yes, I love well, and I think a lot of the writers agree. We loved Grover. Grover has all these levels and qualities, and he could be sweet, and he was fun to write. You know, whether it was Super Grover or any kind of Grover in the restaurant. You know, Grover with Blue. Used to be called Fat Blue. I hear now they call him because Fat Blue sounds could be fat shaming. So now he's called Mr. Johnson, I think, or something like
At
that.
least he has an actual name.
he never called him by his name on the shows, but in
He just
scripts,
called him Sir.
sir, right, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. What? Oh, yes, let me serve you, sir. Um, but in scripts, he was called Fat Blue. That Muppet was called that, and I heard they changed that name. But I love those segments with Grover and doing, he showed up wherever he was. I did one. I did Grover at the singing waiter, where he's the
Oh,
bread
that was one of my favorites when I was a kid.
I remember I wrote that one. And so I love Grover. I loved Oscar, of course, because Oscar is the contrarian and he's fun to write for. And I also liked that a lot of the writers love writing for Telly Monster because he's
Yeah,
so
that seems to
exotic.
be a really popular one among you guys.
Yes, it is. But he was never interesting writing the kids. In fact, kids would say Telly Monster. They didn't even know who he was, most of them. I think his neurosis that writers many of the writers are neurotic. Most writers have some kind of neurosis, and they like
Yeah, that's what Mark Saltzman had said. He's like, Telly's us.
everybody loved Telly, but didn't connect with the kids the same way he connected with the writers. Whenever I say Telly was a favorite, some if parents of kids or kids say, Who's Telly Monster?" So anyway, I like that, and I was often, I think I don't want to speak for everybody, but I was frustrated often with Elmo, who is I mean, he became the juggernaut of the whole thing because you spend time writing for him or even writing lyrics, and then it's got this voice, and you can't understand a lot of what he says. So as writers, I was frustrated. I said, "What did he say? Did I spend time writing those lyrics?" But he's beloved, and my God, at one point he's kind of like single-handedly saved the show, I think. So he's great, but he wasn't as much fun for me to write for. And at one point he was pretty much in everything. But yeah, and I also like Bert and Ernie a lot. I wrote, by the way, at some point they had the Bert and Ernie's Great Adventures, which were like in the
The
stop
claymation little
exclamation,
bits.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And I had wrote that. A lot of people say, oh, they didn't like it, but that was done in by the studio in Florence, and they did amazing work.
they
It was
did.
what it was. It was claymation, but we had fun writing that because we sent them everywhere. We sent them to the stratosphere. We sent them to ancient Egypt. We sent them everywhere, and
Mhm.
that was fun to write. So I like Bert and Ernie. Now I know they don't do a lot of Bert and Ernie pieces. They say that those pieces, the old pieces, were too talky,
Mm.
and
They're
it's
totally
fun.
redoing Sesame Street now as kind of like the typical kid shows these days, where you've got like one segment and then one little interstitial and then another full-on segment.
Yeah. Yeah, that was happening before I stopped right before COVID. It didn't have to do with COVID, but I just said, okay, I've done it. And it was the 50th anniversary, and I said I started season 10, so I wanted to make it through season 50. Actually, they asked me to come back for season 51. I wrote two shows, and one of them we introduced a gay couple with a child.
Right. Yeah, I actually had that listed here.
So we did that. But anyway, going back to that thing before we get into that, already it was happening. We had, at 8:05, you're in Cookie Monster's Healthy Eating, and then you're in Almost Thing and all. And it felt a little more constricted. And we didn't have, also, we went from an hour to an hour and to a half an hour, which I understand the needs for that. But we didn't have the time, all those guest stars that we used to have. We didn't all have all the times to do the inserts, which were fun to do a song, to do a parody. It seemed it became more, there was less that you could play around with that
Mm.
this show. And I think all the old writers feel that, and we all talk about that a lot. The leeway that we had before being able to do all these great things, and all of a sudden you do a parody, and they do this huge production, even bigger than you imagined. That all got a little bit. I used to do a lot of opera parodies or things like that, and we all love doing film parodies, and that there was no real room for it in the new Sesame Street.
Yeah. They do them more so online now than on the actual
Online, I
show.
think a lot of it is done for online. That and they just keep as they say, the real estate by keeping the show. But I think most kids may watch clips online. So I guess yeah, I see that occasionally. I do something for online, and they're still wonderful. But the show, it doesn't have the scope that it once did
Mhm.
because of needs. And I think they went the way that things were going. And I don't, it's just a different thing. But it's funny that they say, early on they used to blame Sesame Street for attention span shortage. And yet you see those segments with Bert and Ernie, which were two talking heads for 2 minutes. At one point, we couldn't have that. Like, you couldn't go for more than 15 seconds without sending a sheep flying across the screen or having a duck squawk through or something. It was just action, and had to be action inserted every single moment. We didn't do any more of those on the front stoop with Bob or Linda doing a song about butterfly or those very tender moments. And whenever I wrote a lyric that I thought I saw it as kind of a tender or quieter moment, I'd get the music back, and it was upbeat, it was hip hop, and which is fine, but sometimes the lyrics and the sentiment of it I thought was lost, you know.
So with the Muppets, it kind of makes me wonder what was Jim Henson like.
I mean, Jim Henson was still there when I came in, but not the whole time. He and Frank Oz would still come for a while because they were already in London. They were doing or starting. I don't know if the Muppet Show was already on or they were getting it ready. They were doing Fraggle Rock in Canada. They were doing his film, so he wasn't there all the time. And of course, when I came in, I was in awe. I would watch him work, and I was in awe. And the first time I had a one of my first segments. It was I think I think it was Grover singing. No, it was Kermit the Frog singing a song, and that was kind of like a takeoff on Frank Sinatra in a nightclub and all that.
Was that
And I
that
go,
one, My Pollywog Ways?
yes, yes, yes. That was like I think my first season there. So I go into a studio which we used to tape on Upper Broadway. And I walk in, I'm kind of like very shy, and I'm listening and I'm watching, and Henson is doing my segment, and I'm in awe. And all of a sudden I hear with a loudspeaker, I hear, who wrote this? And I just, oh my God, I wanted to slink out of the studio. And then one of the cameramen, Frankie, who was a character, came and said, that's John Stone. He does that to every new writer. Don't worry. But I wanted to disappear. That was kind of a dirty trick to play. And later, I always was intimidated of John Stone. Later, I grew to love him, and he was wonderful. But so my experience with Jim Henson was mostly watching them do mostly Bert and Ernie bits that they come and do, or inserts that they would do. They weren't working on the show. And I do remember one day that we had a meeting. All the writers up there and the producer. I think Dulcie Singer was the producer then, and he came in and he said what he wanted to do. It was to listen to Jim Henson say what he would like us to do, and he was ready doing the Muppet Show. So he said, "Oh, I want big production numbers, and I want this, and I want that," and they were great ideas. But he spoke about what he wanted, and they were all very big things. And when he walked out, I remember Dulcie saying, "Scratch all that. We don't have the budget." I never forgot that. And he was great. His ideas were great, but he wanted at that point to do, he'd been doing the regular stuff for a long time. He wanted big things. He wanted big production.
Especially given the big production number style of the Muppet Show, too.
Right. So that he would have liked to have brought more of that to Sesame Street. But I remember he just walked out and Dulcie said, scrap all of that or scratch all of that. And she explained why. It wasn't that she didn't like his ideas, but said, they're not within our budget. Anyway, but yeah, he was great. And even in the even long after he died, I remember going in and still watching when Frank Oz would come and he would do still some of his characters and be maybe like he'd be there for a week or 10 days. And it was always wonderful. It just, wow, everything popped.
Mm. Talking about the music of Sesame Street, because you brought up that song, My Pollywog Ways, which, fun fact for the listeners, actually, in my last video, I talked about an old school Sesame Street where Bert falls head over heels for this basic twin female version of him and starts singing his own love song. which was co-written by the one of the big time composers of the 60s and 70s, Lee Pockrass. Lee did the music for My Pollywog Ways. That was another one of his Sesame Street contributions that he had at that time.
Yes, he did. He was writing. He was writing the first. I never. At that point, early on, I never met him. I wish I had.
Okay.
He wrote that, and he may have written a couple of other things that I wrote early on, but we never would meet the composers at that point.
Oh, okay.
And we met later on. They made it, they arranged it because they wanted to make sure the writers, the composer was writing what the lyricist had in mind. So then they would contact us more and all that. And maybe we had always been free to go to the music department if so, but it wasn't so much. They would usually write the music, and that was that. I got to know a little bit more with Joe Raposo.
Right, that was actually going to be my next question.
Yeah. And Joe was a character, and Joe was a big talented, and another one I admired. But Joe, and I'm saying a lot of stuff out of school, but Joe was tricky because Joe could change a couple of lyric lines to fit the meter, which is doable. But then he would put, music Joe Raposo, lyrics Luis Santeiro and Joe Raposo, and he had just changed a couple of lines, abbreviated or added, something to just, with the meter of the music he was thinking.
At least he would still give you credit for it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He didn't take the credit away. But if you were collaborating, because that happens always, and with a musician is putting your lyrics to music, he says, let's do this, let's do that, and we need this here, I need this here, and then you adapt it. But he did that, and of course, it was very early on in my. I would never have contested that, but I could see that songs that I know. I see the lyric sheet. But he was a character and very talented, and wrote, of course, some of the great songs. Early on, it was him, and then and Jeff Moss too, who of course wrote Rubber Ducky, and it was great. I mean, I feel so honored or proud to have written stuff with Joe Raposo and Lee Pockrass and many of those composers. We had later on. I had things they would all be sent to him, but oh my God. Well, I'm thinking of who wrote Little Mermaid and all the
Alan Menken.
Alan Menken. Alan Menken was writing a lot of stuff for them, and I can't remember all of them, but he did one which is a simple little song, but it was a Martian song. Yip 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 yip. Yip yip. He wrote the music to that, and I see the music sheets, and there's a lot of stuff that Alan Menken did, and so it's great. And then later on. Also, they brought in a lot of the crew from before Hamilton. They brought in a lot of the crew from In the Heights. So Bill Sherman, and he would bring in of course Lin-Manuel. He wrote stuff and also music. Oh my God, Alex Lacamoire, who now has become one of the biggest music arrangers in Broadway because he did Hamilton. And he did stuff that I did, and so did Lin-Manuel. And then Lin-Manuel, of course, that's before now he's everywhere. So
oh yeah.
Yeah. But no, so it's amazing the composers that they've had there over the years, and that we've been, very honored to have worked with. I think that's great.
Well, talking about the music of Sesame Street, another person who this podcast and myself are very close with is, of course, Ivy Austin. And I brought that up to a couple of previous guests that I'm friends with Ivy. And I asked, did you know her? And they're like, oh, of course, that's Danny Epstein's daughter. And a lot of those people have just talked so nicely about Danny. And it kind of makes me wonder if you had much of an interaction with him, if you got to know him.
I did. Danny was a character. You just sort of, I remember meandering through the office, and he had just a way about him. He was like I don't know, he was just a real... I liked him a lot, and he was very good. You could go to him and talk to him about something, and it was so I liked Danny a lot, absolutely. And I went, not early on, at some point I went to a few music tapings of the soundtracks, and you were welcome to go. But oh yeah, Danny Epstein was a big character there, a big presence. Him, and then Dave Connor, who worked with him.
Yeah, that's another one that people talk about a lot.
Wonderful, wonderful man. But Danny Epstein, there was something about him besides whatever his talent. He was a character. He was this little guy, and he'd walk to the office, and and he was very, and he had this quirky sense of humor. I like that. I'd like Danny a lot. Yeah.
With all the Latino stuff that you've done for Sesame Street, another person who I was very close with, and unfortunately, I never got to have him on this podcast, but he was a very, very good friend. I think about him every day. Was Emilio Delgado?
Oh, Emilio was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful man. I liked him.
Oh
I
yeah,
didn't know apparently he didn't want to know anybody to know that he was ill.
oh yeah. He never.
And
I never even knew.
no, all of a sudden I got the email that Emilio had passed away, and I was shocked. And I knew
I
Emilio. I
was
was,
I was taking a walk. I was traveling and I was taking a walk and I opened my phone and there was something on social media about Emilio Delgado that he had died and I'm like I just talked to him 2 days ago. There's no way that that's true. So I googled it and it was already on TMZ. It was like a second after I saw it. It was already everywhere.
it was, yeah. No, it was shocking. I knew him and his wife Carol, and I liked him. And I used to get he was just he had this classy, snazzy way about him. He was
Oh
just
yeah.
and we for a while, he was a member of I don't know if the Players Club, which is a club here, was started by John Wilkes Booth's brother, by Edwin Booth, and he was a member there, and I was a member for a while, and I'd get together with him and Carol there for drinks, and he was so much fun to be with, and such a character, and he actually uh, did a play of mine that we were reading. It was called The Spanish Vampire, and we were going to produce it. And then he did a reading. He was sensational. And then the company could never get the money to produce it. So he'd come to my house. I was very close to Amelia. I've been close. I mean, there are people I've been gotten closer to. I was close to him, and I also have been felt like a friendly relationship with Sonia Manzano too. I don't know if it's because they're both Latins, but we're close, and I miss Emilio a lot. And Sonia and I still get together, considering how busy she is. We still get together for dinner every now and then. And I've seen Carol, his widow, a few times since Emilio died. But he was
Yeah,
one.
I hear from her sometimes too.
She's great. But Emilio really missed. They have a picture of him at the Players, that they had a tribute to him after he died, and they have a picture on the walls. Now he's joined all the other greats. But yeah, he's wonderful. I think about it. One of the great things of being all those years in Sesame Street, all the great people I got to know, to meet, and to work with. I think that's one of the greatest things. It really, I didn't know, but I remember when I was offered the job, and I said, I didn't particularly want to write for children. I was thinking I was going to write a sitcom, I was going to write a film, and I said, okay, I'll do this till I get my bearings and something else. Little did I know it was going to be a great job for 40 years, but it's wonderful, wonderful. You look back and you see, I was so lucky to fall into that.
So you mentioned earlier that one of your earlier pieces was, along with Judy and Sarah, the Sesame Street in Puerto Rico series of episodes that they did.
Yeah.
And Ozzy actually was a previous guest on this show as well, and
Oh,
we
you've
talked.
had it, so you know Ozzy, yeah.
Oh yeah, he's so cool and he's so funny.
Yeah.
And but yeah, we talked about Sesame Street being in Puerto Rico, and like at that time, they were doing quite a few stuff on location. They did New Mexico, they did Hawaii,
Yeah.
and a lot of those was it seemed as if it was meant to teach a lot of culture. What was
Mhm.
it like to go on location in Puerto Rico?
I went on scouting on
Okay.
location. I didn't go when they filmed, but I scouting, and it was great because I knew Ozzy, so I went with Ozzy, and I forget who the other producer was. So it was great because got me thinking about, I was jotting down notes and all that. I didn't go for the taping. I think that was a great experience for everybody who did go. Yeah, they had done New Mexico. Hawaii, they did Hawaii. I forget what season that was. I didn't
Would have been
wasn't
in the late 70s.
Probably, right. So I think that was right around the time that I started. I and I did do I don't know if it was the new, yeah, I went with one which I went with Arlene Sherman, who was the an executive producer, and we filmed. We were in New Mexico, and I did that. I wrote a lot of those, and we had Big Bird on a riding a horse.
Oh, I think that was Montana.
Montana. Okay. No, no, not Montana. I think it was Arizona. It was Arizona or we were in, yeah, we were in Phoenix. We were in Phoenix because then I was having a play of mine being done there too. So it was just a coincidence that I was there and a play of mine was being done in Phoenix. We filmed various segments. I think Emilio was there and it was a rodeo. And but the one thing, because it was sweltering, and it was the first time I saw they have a collar that's it's like ice cubes that you freeze and then you put it on so it helps the flow of blood cool it to your head so you won't pass out. I was passing out just
Oh
watching.
my
And Big
gosh.
Bird, I mean, Carol Spinney was in the Big Bird suit, in the Big Bird suit, riding a horse around the rodeo round. That was incredible. So we
He
had a
was brave, man.
oh my God, it was amazing. But I remember we filmed a few things in the desert. He met some birds from the desert, one that lived inside a big cactus. It was a prop cactus. And then there was a rodeo, and it was fun. Yeah, it was fun. And then I think in the show, when they did that, I had written also for Linda Ronstadt. I did a rodeo song for her. Part of her songs for me, Canciones de mi Padre, the songs for she did an album of all those old rancheras, and she was on the show, and she was wonderful. So I think that was part of that whole when we tried to do the culture to bring in that whole Mexican American culture. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
A couple of years ago, just talking about episodes of Sesame Street that have had continuing storylines. A couple of years ago, I did a look back on Slimy Goes to the Moon, and I
Yes.
brought back two previous guests, Marty and Lou, because of
Uh-huh.
course Lou was the head writer, so he would oversee everything. Marty being Slimy, so I had this idea to do it, and I got a hold of them, and I was like, "Would you guys like to come back and do this retrospective with me?" And they did. And as I was researching for it,
Yeah.
because they were all the episodes were, of course, written by many different writers, but I believe you wrote the first out of that little series of Slimy going to the moon. Was it your idea?
Yes, that season.
Because Belinda Ward credits you for having the idea.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Well, it was that season. The then executive producer, Lohman. My God. Um, uh, oh my God. I
Oh,
forget.
Michael.
Michael Lohm. Oh my God, I'm sorry. I forgive me, Michael, for forgetting. I'm coming up with all these names. He had hired me to be a writer. He decided to wanted to have a writer in the studio so that he could, I could be a liaison with the writers. If something, are you sure this prop is right, or all that stuff. So I spent a season in the studio, and that year I was coming up with a lot of ideas because I was watching everything. And I don't know why I said Lou, who was the head writer at that point, was in the studio one day, and I said to him, Lou, have you ever thought we could send Slimy to the moon? So I said that, and he loved the idea, and that we could do that as a running thing. And I know I wrote at least two. I wrote the one where he goes to WASA, the worm agency, and he's testing that he's on this carousel to see if he gets dizzy and he gets flown all over. So I wrote a
Yeah,
couple of
Lou always gets a big kick out of the worms falling off.
yeah. That was yeah, I wrote that one. I wrote a couple of the ones. I don't know how many. Yeah, no, I wrote a few because we did it over the whole season. Then
Mhm.
we had Slimy to the Moon. We had what's his name coming to sing the song.
Tony Bennett.
Tony Bennett on a takeoff of well, it was Fly Me to the Moon, but Slimy to the Moon.
It's funny
Those
when
were
I wrote the outline for the retrospective. So it was done in three parts. One was me just describing everything that happened in it, and then talking to Marty, and then talking to Lou. And I kind of kept it a secret from Nostalgia Talk's social media for a while, but a couple of my friends read the script for how I was going to describe it. And one of my friends looks at me and she's like, by any chance, did they parody Fly Me to the Moon as Slimy to the Moon?
Yes, we did. Yes, yes. I wasn't there the day they taped that. But yeah, that was that season that I was there. It was great for coming up with ideas because you're there in the studio, the whole thing, and you think of this and you think of that. And I don't know what had happened that day, but Lou was there, and I said, Lou, what about sending Slimy to the moon? And that was a fun season. It was great when we had an idea like that. It was great. I remember for the first quite a few seasons that I started, we did individual segments, and it was hard because each segment you have to come up with 6 different ideas and somehow maybe tie it to the other, but they weren't stories. So when we went to storylines, I loved it. I think it was easier for me to do storylines that went through the script than doing 6 individual ideas. So anyway, but that
Well,
was
the
great.
the other thing about those episodes that Lou and I talked about very heavily was the chicken that's stowed away on the spaceship.
It's funny. Oh my God. Yes, 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 yes. We love chickens, Yeah, that
Was
was
that your idea too?
no, no, no. The
Okay.
chicken that's Lou loves chickens. Chickens and penguins. But no, that was, everybody ran, and then everybody came up with ideas and all that. My basic idea was doing that, and then we came up with Wasa, and it was so much fun, on the countdown. That was great. There were things like that I know over the years that really brought in a lot of viewers. That one, when Maria got married, the year that she got married, that was that was a big one. It was great when we had stories of that, of that nature.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
The other significant thing for Sesame Street that you wrote that you actually brought up was introducing the first gay couple, Frank and Dave.
Mhm.
And in a world like what we're living in now, or in the last few years, I believe, not to be political, but Sesame Street has done a better job of tackling these situations than a lot of other people have. Like over the last 40 years, we've seen the death of Mr. Hooper, Miles being adopted. You brought up Maria and Luis getting married and having a kid. There
Mhm.
was one episode that I don't know if you'd know of, but I did a look back on it for this podcast as well. That John Stone wrote that was actually very subtly hinted at.
Racial, where Gina gets insulting calls. Was that it?
I forgot about that one, but there was one that John wrote that dealt with the Just Say No campaign.
Uh-huh.
But I can
Uh-huh.
understand why Sesame Street wouldn't want to reference drugs directly, but
Hmm.
they did it in kind of a way that if you watch it as an adult, it's like, okay, they are actually talking about the issue of drugs, but they're just hiding it from the kids. But the same goes for drugs as it does for anything else.
Yes.
Um, and since the last few years, there's been a lot more diversity on Sesame Street, which is a good thing. I love that. We've had Julia, we've had Tamir and Gabrielle, and then you came up with, or you wrote, I shouldn't say came up with, you wrote Dave and Frank. How did that all happen?
Well, you're right. Sesame Street has always been on the forefront. Now, in terms of the introducing a gay couple, I know that a couple of shows, children's shows, had already had, in a very subtle thing. So, Alan Muraoka, who plays Alan
Mm-hmm.
and also directs, he had approached the producers about doing a gay script, a script where they introduce in some way. And they asked me if I wanted to do it. I said, yes, I'd love to. And I did something where it had to do with actually, I wrote a script. We were introducing the character Alan had a partner that came
Oh,
in and they met him. And then, and he talked, subtly about, yes, we're together. We've been together. He's my best friend. So it affected that they lived together. It was that was about it. I forget about the what was else was going on. I forget it. Well, I wrote so many. I forget the specifics. But then at the last minute, they got cold feet and they didn't do it. And that was my 50th year. So that's the 50th thing. And I finished all my scripts and I said, I'm done. And then the next year they thought about it again and they said, would you come back? We'd like to do it, but not with Alan, not with one of our characters, but introducing new characters. And I said, okay, I'd like to give it another shot. And what we did was, it was family day. So everybody's having their family and, all the Muppets and everybody. And Nina, is Nina, right?
mm-hmm.
Yeah, she had her brother was coming with her partner and a little daughter. So that's the way we did it. It was subtle, but they talked about how they're a family and how they sing songs to their daughter. There's a song I think that they played to the daughter. So it was subtle, but it was there. And I don't know if they have come back since because I haven't been
They
watching.
have.
They have. Okay, that's good to know. that they did, that it
Kind of
wasn't.
sporadically, but they're like
Yeah,
they're in the
yeah.
credits.
Well, there's so many characters in Sesame Street. That's always been a problem, that it's hard to follow them. Sometimes they say other shows, they're going to go see so and so, whoever. And with Sesame Street, we always had a huge cast. They try to reduce it, and then they start growing again.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
I'm
I don't
glad
know if
that,
you saw the 50th anniversary special that they did a couple years
yes,
ago that brought
yeah.
back so many of these classic Muppets, and a lot of them who kids these days probably are like, who the hell is that guy? They have lines, maybe just one, but even so, they're getting some screen time so the kids can see.
I thought that was great. The last season that I wrote, not the previous, the 50th season, I also wrote a script that was Oscar is doing spring dusting. He's got all this stuff out, and he finds this old map,
I
and
remember this one.
yeah, and it's a map of the way Sesame Street was at the beginning. Like
Mm-hmm.
they were construction doors in front of Big Bird's nest,
The
and they
Fix It
were
Shop.
all that stuff. So, and they go back. So I did it as a tribute to all the years, how it had changed.
I,
And
I love that. I love that somebody who was there for so long is the one who did that as a tribute.
yeah,
That's just perfect.
I thought, and that was my last year, and I came up with that idea, and we made it like a treasure hunt that they're trying to find out where everything was and all that. But it came up with how Sesame Street had changed. That there wasn't a window at the fix-it shop, and there were the garage doors were, and now there's a library. So that was fun to do that. You
Mm-hmm.
know, yeah.
Talking
So,
about anniversaries for Sesame Street, you wrote the musical celebration 25th anniversary special.
and I have and I'm having a watch that was made for it.
I know that none of the listeners can see it, but I
No,
can.
no, but it's funny. It's a terrible watch to be able. It's so busy that I'll put it up really close that it's hard to tell time. But my other watch, the battery died, and let's see where can I put it? It's really close. I don't know if you can see it there.
Oh
It's got
my
it's got Big
God.
Bird and Elmo, and it says 25th anniversary. So, and I just picked it out of my drawer the other day, and I've started wearing it. So, yeah, I wrote that thing where, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that was a fun thing. We did it in the park in Central Park, and yeah, I wrote that. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's great, and I was there another 25 years. That's amazing,
And of course, you had Lady Smith Black Mambazo doing Sing with all the Muppets and all the human cast.
And we had a La La Land, everybody La La Land. They were all trying to audition to La 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 La. It was a fun one to.
Yeah, it's a very complicated way of saying singers, la lars.
Yes, La Lars, La Lars. Yeah, that was great. And, I forget. I mean, you brought it up. I forget about all the things I did over all those years. And people say, which scripts did you like? I say, I don't know. There were so many. They're all kind of blend in, you know. But one thing, I don't know if that was one of the questions you want to write, but one thing that I loved doing during my years in Sesame Street, they had those co-productions all over the world, and everywhere. And somehow I got into that loop, and I like to travel, so they would send me. So I went to Russia, to Israel, to China, to Indonesia, to Mexico, to Canada, to Germany, to Spain, to the Emirates. I love that because it was interesting to deal without being imperialist, trying to dictate. We had certain things that were required. The shows had to be inclusive, inclusive. They had to be sexually equal, men and women. It had to have some racial inclusion, all those things that were given. Other than that, they could create their own characters, adapt it to their culture. But it was amazing all the fights that we got into because people did not want to have, oh, a man doing the dishes in Russia? No, no, no self-respecting Russian man to do the dishes for the family. Things like that you ran into. In China, they wanted to create a Muppet that was a tiger, and the head writer said, no, a tiger cannot be a female. And we had to have a female because we had Big Bird and Elmo. They had to create a female character. And the female writers wanted a tiger. The head writer said, no, a tiger is to be male because he's strong. I said, well, there are female writers, tigers, otherwise they would have died out. So you ran into problems like that. And to finesse them in a way, I love doing that. So that was something that I remember very fondly, all the overseas workshops that I did with writers.
That's awesome.
Mm.
So as I said, Sesame Street's tackled a lot of really what some kids might think to be very difficult topics.
Mm.
But it's a lot of those moments, I think, that really have helped a lot of kids, especially, as I mentioned before, the death of Mr. Hooper. There's one I remember from when I was a kid where there was a fire at Hooper's store, and Elmo is beyond traumatized by this. And so finally fires out. It was not a major fire, and then Alan and Maria are like, "Okay, Elmo, let's go have some lunch." And Elmo says, "I can't do Elmo's voice. It honestly sounds like I'm scratchy, but
Yeah,
it
yeah,
basically
yeah.
says, I don't want to go into Hooper's store ever again," because he couldn't look at it the same. Like I
Mm.
was just thinking about this recently. We had a house fire just on the other end of my street. I couldn't go down that road for quite a while. Luckily, I wasn't witness to it, but still, just knowing that it happened.
Oh.
Um, but I think through a lot of those episodes, kids have really kind of understood a lot
Mm.
more about, and especially the peer pressure one that I mentioned, what to do in any situation. So, and this is a question I ask a lot when it comes to Sesame Street. Has there ever been a time where you felt the most proud to be a part of it?
Well, it's interesting. Like like right now, when you mentioned, you have this this website and know all this information and know that and know that so and so wrote this and so and so wrote that and say, oh my God, I was part of something that meant something to people. That's because we work in isolation, writers, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I would write out of the house. Most of the writers did. So it's only when you come across somebody who said that, oh, my kid learned to do that. I remember I did some songs for years ago for fire prevention, or fire safety, and we did stop, drop, and roll. And somebody told me that there was a fire in there. I mean,
Is
they
that the
weren't.
one sung by Oscar?
Yes. Yeah,
You
he
gotta
wrote,
stop, drop, and roll, kind of
bro.
like a
Yeah.
Chuck Berry type. Yeah, I had a
Well,
cassette
I
of
did. I
that
don't
when I was
know
a
because
kid.
I wrote one. I forget it, but it was Stop, Drop, and Roll. I'm sure they've done them over the years, but I did
Okay.
one. There was they did a little recording of it and everything. Stop, Drop, and Roll. It was about three or four songs, and somebody told me that they had their kid. There'd been a fire, not that they were in danger imminent, but the kid told them, "Stop, drop, and roll, mom. Stop, drop, and roll." So that they learned it from it. That they did learn that. So those are moments that you feel, yeah, proud that we did that. By the way, going back to the death, Mr. Hooper's death, which Norman wrote, that's one of the most beautiful and most meaningful. Every time I see the clip somewhere, I'm still emotional like that.
Yeah,
But we did a lot.
Norman and I talk about that one from time to time, and the thing I praised him for with it
Mm, mm,
was it was very, very basic. Like it's so easy to say when somebody dies, they've gone to a better place. I mean, that's one way to make someone feel less sad about it, but Sesame
right.
Street handled it in a way that no, it's okay to be sad. And you're right, things aren't ever going to be the same again. And so the
What he
line,
explained, and I thought it
yeah,
was brilliant when he
and the
says,
line just because it has to be this way just because.
yeah,
That's
it's
and that's
just
that's
because.
that's true.
But he also said, which is great, they explain death as because he had these drawings. Well, I'll hold it till he comes back. And he says, Big Bird, he's not going to come back. When you die, you don't come back. And that was pretty, that was an amazing way to say it. I think it's just beautiful the way it was
Mm.
dealt with, you know.
Yeah, total
I
deep
thought
cut.
another Disney actually in Coco, which I think was a brilliant film, the
Oh
way they
yeah.
dealt with it, that people really die when you forget. As long as you remember them, they're still alive in a way. And I think that's another beautiful way to put it. But yeah, that death one is wonderful. Speaking of the fire, I think there was one also where Big Bird's nest was torn away by
By a hurricane.
a
Yeah.
hurricane, and he felt that same insecurity. So yes, they've dealt with that stuff over the years, and it's wonderful that they deal. I hope they still are. Now there's this feeling like your kids can't hear anything. There's a tendency now to not deal with subjects, to just protect, too much overprotection, and I think it's important to deal with that.
They
You know?
have really, I think, kind of subtle ways at handling it now. Like I remember Tamir and Gabrielle were introduced because of the Black Lives Matter
Mm.
protests, and I felt, and I'm sure they did too, but I felt like that was a very good way of handling it by introducing Muppets of color.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, remember there early on it was Roosevelt Franklin, which is very
Yeah.
popular, who was very popular, and then they did away with it because they thought it was too, to get too much of a stereotype, and yet I know people who are now in their probably in their 50s who grew up with that and loved it, and they said how wonderful it was. And I met somebody who showed me he still had the recording, which I think is a collector's item. It's probably like hundreds of dollars in Amazon if you can find it. But the Muppets, of course, the idea of the different color Muppets is that in a way they were supposed to be different racial things. But I haven't watched the show. Occasionally I've come across it, but I must confess I haven't watched it very much in the last few years. So
Well, a few months ago, I met Loretta Long.
did
She
you
was
have her on the
doing.
show?
I haven't had her on the show yet, but for any of the listeners, I did bring it up to her. So when I met her, it was just like she was having like a Zoom event, and anybody could log in. It was open discussion,
Mm,
and there were a couple of people who had said that when they saw people like Gordon and Susan and David and Luis and Maria, they saw themselves because like Sesame Street from the start has always been and always was
mm,
very diverse, and
mm,
by having humans of color, they really did feel they were represented on
mm,
TV
Oh,
alongside of this colorful group of Muppets.
absolutely, and that's one thing that's important. And now you're seeing a lot more diversity and Latins, but certainly when I was growing up, there was nobody. And I think one of the main things, and people would tell me that I felt, like I said, even though I didn't do all the Latin stuff, but just to come up when the camera came up on Luisa Maria and they're speaking in Spanish, I see, I see, and then all of a sudden, oh hi, welcome to Sesame Street. But just to hear them speak occasionally to each other in Spanish, that is important how they saw themselves, and I think it's so important to see yourself represented and represented in a good way, not just, in like TV, there's still instead of Latins or Hispanics, I don't know what's the word that is to be used. There are a lot of drug
I use
addicts.
both.
Okay, I use both, and I think most Latins are fine with that, and most Latins don't like Latinx, for example. We find there is a language that has masculine and feminine, and most of the Latins I've talked, they find that that's just they're not happy with it. But to see Luis and Maria speaking Spanish a little bit, or saying or greeting in Spanish, and you felt okay, there's somebody like me, and they're likable people. They're not drug addicts, they're not criminals, they're not whatever. So I think that is something that Sesame Street did that was wonderful. And I assume the same thing with the African Americans that were from the very beginning, Gordon, Susan, a family. I think that's great. And that really, when Sesame Street started in 68 or 69, that was novel. That wasn't around.
Mhm.
So I think that's one of the best things that Sesame Street has done. No.
So to wrap it up, do you have any celebrity stories from Sesame Street that you'd like to share?
Oh my, it's like I've worked with, let's say, who did not stories. I remember when okay, Celia Cruz. I don't know if she was the queen of salsa. She is
Mhm.
she is an idol for Latins, and I suggested we have her on the show. This is way back, and in fact, that Joe Raposo wrote an initial song, this thing for her, and I said, "This is Broadway. She's not Broadway. She's salsa. She's music." And then he rewrote her. He brought some people to arrange it, and then she did something because I was doing parody of some of her songs. Celia, she never felt comfortable in English. She knew how to say certain things. So before she had to sing in English, she was very nervous. And so she held my hand and she said, "Oh, Luis, please go through the lyrics with me." So I sang the song with her. And to me, having grown up with Celia Cruz since I was a kid in Cuba, I can't tell you how. I said, I am here singing a song with Celia that she's going to sing, refreshing her on the lyrics because they're in English and she feels insecure about singing. That to me was one of the great things. The same thing happened kind of with when Linda Ronstadt did her things, because her Spanish was not great, and even though she'd sung the I don't know. She sang those lyrics in Spanish and she sounded very good, but she also felt not that the songs were in Spanish, but there were some Spanish words. And she had me sit with her and we went over the song too. Those are two that I remember. I remember having some of the big opera people who were on doing stuff, and I was just impressed. You know, these are people who sing at the Met and who are divas, and they're here doing this segment based on a parody that I did. Those are the ones that I remember.
If they're divas and they're doing Sesame Street, it really does say a lot about what they'll do. Like, you know what I mean? Because Sesame Street is like, everybody thinks it's just, oh, it's a little kid show. Well, look at all the adults who have either been on it, worked on it.
Yeah, yeah. Everybody, particularly if they had kids, because the kids, they said, you know, people would say, oh, I've done everything, but I was on Sesame Street, and my kids, that's the thing that they're proudest of, you know?
Aww.
So anyway, it's been a great ride, and I'm very happy that that fell into my lap, which really did, you know.
Yeah.
No. And you're I'm impressed with you and your knowledge and your love of it. That's wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, I've really, really enjoyed speaking with you. Is there anything you want to say to wrap up?
No, that's it. That's it. I'm very honored. Thank you for asking me to be part of it. Talk to everybody. Talk to Sonia. I mean, well, everybody, anybody, but Sonia, definitely try to get Sonia. And I'll be happy to send her send me a thing, and I'll say talk to James, you know. But she will.
That'd be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. But send her something, and and send me, and I'll ask her. But everybody will be happy to talk to you, I'm sure. You know, and I know you've talked to everybody, and
yeah, this is 105, and we just announced 106 and 107.
Oh my God, that's great. You're gonna get everybody, and this is gonna be an amazing record, you know, because you're talking about, you know, and I'm sure you're also, and I'm not so much in touch with. I mean, some of the people who remain from when I was there, but there's a whole new cast, a lot of people that are there that I'm not familiar with anymore, you know?
But, I mean, it's I've talked to more than just Sesame Street people. I mean, this show's really, really eclectic.
I know it's all about nostalgia in general. It's wonderful that you do. Yeah, not Sesame Street, but from the point of view of Sesame Street, you're getting everybody. That's amazing.
Seems like it. Yeah.
How much fun. How great that you're doing this. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being a part of it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
And listeners, you guys know where to go for updates on upcoming Nostalgia Talks, Facebook, Twitter. I just recently started a Blue Sky Social account for Nostalgia Talk, and all 3 of those links are in the description. And I will see you next time. Peace out.